went, there he goes. Okay, well, welcome again for our Faith Formation and our soup suppers during Lent. And I want to introduce you to some dear friends of mine, Paul Covino and his wife Ann. And Paul is now the chaplain at Assumption College of Worcester, head of campus ministry there. He was ordained a deacon last year.
In June.
Big funny nappy. They are the proud grandparents of, oh come on, Calvin.
Calvin, 16-month-old.
16-month-old. And he's just like, hey, here's my world. It's all good. But as I said, we've been friends. I was just counting on my fingers. We're coming up on our 25th anniversary.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so
wow.
There you go.
Wow.
We look good.
We do look good. Just like we looked 25 years ago.
That's exactly. Paul first began part of his ministry in Georgetown at Holy Trinity Church as the director of liturgy. Paul also has our Breaking Bread issues from Oregon Catholic Press. Paul was or still is a writer for them, and has written. He and Ann have put together, well, with Ann's help, a book on marriage preparation, and based on their experience of their marriage, they said, let's do it better. So marriage preparation and all that stuff, it's really, really very well done. Ann is also a midwife at St. Vincent's Hospital. So she has a very interesting job, to say the least. But it's great to have him here. And as I say, Paul is a protege. I can say this honestly, a protege of Monsignor Mangiuso. Oh. So there you go. Now you're in, Paul. Okay. Welcome, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Quite literally, I am in the work that I am because of Jim Mangiuso. He was a newly minted baby priest when I was a junior or senior in high school, and he was assigned right after his ordination to St. Mary's in Shrewsbury, which is where I grew up. And I, of course, was the head altar boy. I wouldn't figure that out, right? I had to work with him, and he really opened my eyes to the world of liturgy. And so he mentored me, and after 2 years of doing pre-med in college, I decided I wanted to venture out into this thing called liturgy, and much to my parents' astonishment, because they had no idea what a layperson would be doing in a field like that. But he was a great mentor to me, and I've had many over the years since then, including my friend Mike Broderick here, but Jimmy was really one of the early people that got me into this business, and so I have him to thank, or sometimes complain about. I'm very grateful to him. Well, it's interesting, we're doing a talk tonight on liturgical year and time, since we're starting 10 or 15 minutes late. How's that for a talk on time? But technology, it takes 3 computers to finally get a simple image up. Years ago, I used to come with the marker and lots of aids, and no problem at all. And they all said, go to overhead projectors. So I did that for a while, and they said, no, you got to go to PowerPoint. So I've done that, and it's all gone downhill. I'm ready to go back to the old stuff. If we hadn't gotten this image up there, I would have been back at the old stuff tonight. So maybe if we could just turn the lights off on the front there, and how's that? Still okay for everyone? So tonight, and we've got, you said it was 3.5 hours? He said about as long as he preaches on Sunday, right? So what is our time for chili?
Done.
Done? No. Good night. See you later. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, okay. So tonight, I know you've had a lot of wonderful sessions in this series. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at the liturgical year, our calendar in the church. So celebrating our faith, let's see if I can get this to work now. Celebrating our faith. All right, let's try this one over here. Yes, there. How's that? All right. Now we're going to start with a prayer. So see where the arrow is? Can everyone see that right there? This is like going to the eye doctor, right? You see the big arrow, and everyone says yes. And you say, see those words? And everyone says no. Right. So I'm going to read this prayer to you, and this is a prayer from our Missal, the big book of prayers the priest uses for the beginning of the civil year. It's a beautiful prayer. So if you can't see it, this is how it sounds. O God, who are without beginning or end, the source of all creation, grant us so to live this new year, whose beginning we dedicate to you, that we may abound in good things and be resplendent with works of holiness, through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. It's a beautiful prayer, as the title says, for at the beginning of the civil year. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. You could look up there and find the answer, but it's so small you'll never find it. What's the one day of the year this prayer can't be used? Cannot be used?
January 1st.
January 1st. What's the beginning of the civil year? January 1st. One of the many interesting things about our liturgical year. Our liturgical year sometimes coincides with the civil year, and sometimes it has a different way of doing things than the civil year. So January 1st happens to be for us a holy day, a solemnity, Mary, Mother of God, and so that outranks an observance of the beginning of the civil year. So this is basically a prayer we never hear. But it's really nice. It's good we saw it once, right? But one of the interesting things. So let's start with time. We're talking about the liturgical year, a calendar, so we're talking about time. How do you think of time? What's kind of your attitude towards time? So my attitude towards time just now was, oh my God, time's ticking away. We're trying to get this technology up and people are waiting for the presentation to begin. What's up? What are some other people's attitudes toward time?
Not enough.
Not enough time. Never's enough time in a day.
Too quick.
Too quick. Goes by too fast. What else?
I'm getting too old.
I'm getting too old. I was waiting for someone to say that one. What else? The older I get. I worked with one of the first... Sorry? Say again? What was yours?
The older I get, the faster it goes.
The older I get, the faster it goes. Right. All right. My wife says the older she gets, the better I look, right? That's because her eyesight's beginning to fail me. The first pastor I ever worked with, his attitude toward time was, pardon a little bit of the French here, but one damn thing after another. That was his. One damn thing after another. So sometimes our attitudes towards time are comical. The amount of stuff to do and the time to do it in never seems to quite match up. Or, I don't think I can face another year of annual events. Or, me time. And he's sitting down there saying, finally, the kids are asleep, the chores are done, from now until bedtime I can do whatever I want. Moments later. All different ways of looking at time. When we talk about the liturgical year, though, what I want to suggest is we're looking at what we call a sacramental view of time. Sacraments are a really familiar phrase for us. What does sacrament conjure up for you? You might think of the 7 sacraments, ways that we encounter God in things, in natural things. But really it comes from a theology of sacraments that goes back in the ancient church, and just we'll pick up someone here who's about a 13th century guy by the name of Thomas Aquinas. You may have heard a thing or two about him. Rather respected theologian in the church. And among the things that he said is, God is in all things. That we find God in all things. The person who goes out and experiences God in the beautiful sunset. The person who experiences God in the face of a child. The person who experiences God in the love of their spouse. These are all ways that we experience God. God can be found in all things.
Snowstorm too?
Say again?
Oh, yeah.
Snowstorm too. Skiers, we're finding God yesterday, weren't you? I haven't skied in a long time, so I was having a real hard time finding God yesterday. Especially when I was stuck in a snowbank for 2 hours last night. True story. But another person in our church, an English Jesuit by the name of Gerard Manley Hopkins, and writing in the 1800s, said this: the world is charged with the grandeur of God. If you're a poet, you probably are familiar with Hopkins' work. He's one of the most famous English poets of the 1800s. He was a Jesuit priest, didn't live very long. But he was saying more poetically what Aquinas was saying. This idea that the whole world is charged with the grandeur or the presence of God. A couple of other ways of looking at it. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits in the late 1500s, developed a form of spirituality that goes by the name of Ignatian spirituality. And this is one way of expressing it. Finding God in all things is the core of Ignatian spirituality. It's rooted in our awareness that God can be found in everyone, in every place, and in everything. Okay, so the sense that God is pervasive. So that's a basic part of our worldview as Catholics. So time is one of those places, one of those things where we can experience God. And for that I'm going to call on another mentor of mine from more recent times. Her name is Elaine Rendler McQueenie. She's a great pastoral musician. She's the editor of at Oregon Catholic Press, and she teaches at George Mason University in Virginia. And she has a wonderful saying, which is, God is in the timing. Now, some of us might call that coincidence. Have you ever had a coincidence in your life where you just said, God had to be behind this? Yeah, everyone in the room is nodding. Okay, we sometimes think of that as coincidence. But when we look at that through the sacramental lens of faith, we could say what Elaine says, and that God is in the timing. So yes, God's in sunsets, God's in the face of a baby, the love of our spouse, the snowstorm for the skier, all those things. But God is also in time, our experience of time. So that's really what's behind the liturgical year. It's not just a mechanical thing that we kind of go through. It actually has a theological basis. We experience God in the different days, feasts, and seasons. So a couple of images of time. I'm going to go through this real quickly. Just suffice it to say that prior to our Jewish ancestors, so prior to the idea of one God, pagan people, had this idea of time as kind of a closed circle. Anyone here seen the movie Groundhog Day?
Yeah.
Imagine a version where it was Groundhog Year. So it wasn't every day repeating itself, but every year repeating itself. That was basically the pre-Judeo-Christian view of time. That every year just kind of repeated the previous year. You just got 1 year older, but it more or less did the same thing. That's really simplistic way of understanding it, but that's the basic idea. And what happens when we move into Judeo-Christianity, Jews and then Christians, is that a different understanding of time develops. Rather than seeing it as a closed-in circle, it becomes more of a spiral. And here I brought a much more highly developed technological aid here, which is known as a slinky. So if you look at it this way, a slinky two-dimensionally looks like a closed-in circle on itself. But when you do the fun of the slinky, you realize it's the spiral, and that the spiral is connected, right? So it's a circle, but it expands over time, and it's all connected. So think of time, maybe here we are today, right here. And we've got a past, a present, and a future, and they're all connected. So we may do certain things the same at a certain time every year. So in March in New England, we now have lots of snowstorms, right? So that's just what we do in March in New England every year. But we're different this year than we were when we were experiencing March snowstorms last year, right? All of us are different. Not just older, but we're different in probably a lot of qualitative ways as well, right? We're different people. So it is with our understanding of time. We have a past, a present, and a future, and they're all connected. With this view of time, we're basically saying that time is purposeful movement toward a goal. It's not, in the words of my old good friend pastor, one damn thing after another, which is kind of the nihilistic, existentialist way of looking at time, but purposeful movement toward a goal. We're all headed somewhere, right? As Christians, where are we headed?
Heaven.
Heaven or the kingdom of God. Different ways of saying the same thing, right? We're all headed someplace. We believe we have a goal in mind. Wherever we came from, we believe we're headed someplace, okay? So that's the idea of time. For our Jewish ancestors had a similar view of time, and we Christians took that idea over of a movement, purposeful movement toward a goal. So that's kind of the image of time that we have. Now, a few kind of principles of time before we launch into looking at the calendar. And here's now your Greek lesson for the week. So you can leave here tonight and actually say, it's all Greek to me, right? So you're going to learn 3 Greek terms tonight. So when you have your Greek friends around, you can impress them. All right, go to the Greek festival this year down in Worcester. You can impress them with these terms. They won't have a clue what you're talking about. So, ephapax, what does that mean? Everyone know what that means? No speak Greeks here? Easter? Sounds like Easter, doesn't it? Like Paschal? So ephapax basically means something happened one time in history, and it won't happen exactly that way again. So think of American history. The Declaration of Independence was signed on what day? July 4th, 1776, right? That happened at one time. Now, we remember it each year on July 4th, but we don't believe it's actually being signed again, right? It happened once in history, okay? Anamnesis is remembering the thing that happened in history and trying to get some sense of what it has to do with our life today, okay? Remembering in such a way that the meaning and underlying reality of what we remember is present again today. Let me give you an example from my family. I had an uncle, and he was a bachelor, an old bachelor, and he was the brother of the two old aunts of mine. This is on the French-Canadian side of my family, so feisty people. Any French-Canadians? Oh my God. All right, I gotta be real careful telling this story. Well, I'm just gonna, I'll hide the names to protect the guilty here. So Harry was the old bachelor brother, and he would, on every Thanksgiving, get to the house early and get the drinks ready, and come dinner time, he'd sit at that extra table you added for the kids, because the table wasn't big enough. And while he was there, he'd be sitting with the kids, and he'd be saying, now, take the peas and squish them in the mashed potatoes and get all the stuff all mixed together and making a mess of the plate. And he was also the one who, at the end of the meal, could sit down between the two sisters who didn't speak to each other all year long and said, you two old, well, actually, I can't use that word. You two old, you-know-whats. All year long, you don't speak to each other. But it's Thanksgiving, and you're going to speak to each other. And I said, all right, we will. Of course, the next day, they go back to hating each other. And they live next door, by the way. But for the one day of the year, Harry got them to speak together. Thanksgivings come and go, and all of a sudden, Harry dies. The next Thanksgiving comes around. What happens? We start telling the story of Harry, right? We start remembering Harry. We remember that he'd show up a little too early. He'd mix the drinks for people as they came in. He'd sit with the kids and make a mess of the food on the plate. And the two old sisters would say, I hate your guts, but when Harry was here, he got us to speak together. And so we can speak together again today. And we'll go back to hating each other tomorrow. So what was happening in that story? They were doing anamnesis. They were not just remembering Harry as a past event, but what Harry had been able to get them to do was able to happen again. Okay, you see the difference? That's what we do in liturgy all the time. We remember past things and believe that what's underneath those past things can animate us and move us forward again today. All right? That's basically what we do when we believe that the body and the bread and wine become the body and blood. Jesus did this thing 2,000 years ago, and it's not limited to that. The reality of it being present among us in the form of bread and wine is happening again today. Those of you who are at Mass at 5:30, it happened at 5:30 today, or at 5:48, whatever time it was. Okay? Because I know he was a little late showing up, right? I know. So that's what we're basically doing, is we're remembering the past event, we're remembering the aphapax, but not just like a history lesson, because what's underneath it is present again today. And the last part, eschaton. Why do we remember it? Because it moves us toward a future. We bring the presence of Christ into our midst of the Eucharist so that we are impelled toward a future, which is the kingdom, right? So past, present, and future are mixed in time for us, all right? That's an important thing to remember in the liturgical year. Number two, there's two ways of thinking about time: chronos time and kairos time. Very simply, chronos time, that's this over here. I promise this will be the last insult to my friend over there, your pastor. But when you're sitting there and wondering when he's going to end his homily, that's chronos time. You're wondering about how long it's going to go, right? But on those many other occasions where he's really preaching well, and I've heard him preach really well, most often he preaches really well, and I'm not just BSing him there, he really does. That's kairos time, because then you don't care how long he preaches, right? You're really into it, and you forget about this, don't you? We've all experienced time that's limited by this, right? And we've also, hopefully, all experienced chronos time, which is time out of time. Time where you don't care how long it is. Have you all experienced that? Yes. Have you been to a time with family or a party or something you've experienced, you don't care how long it is? My God, I can't believe how late it is already, right? Because we're concerned with the quality of the time rather than the quantity of the time. Okay, the French folks in the room, identify yourself. All right. How do you say night in French? N-I-G-H-T.
Soir.
Le soir, right? The actual time, the physical time is le soir. But what is la soirée? That's the event. Notice that's the feminine. The masculine is the chronos time, the boring ticking of the clock. The really fun part, la soirée, is the feminine form. That's what happens during the night, okay? It's an event that happens during the night. It's the quality of the time. That's what we're talking about here. Now, liturgical calendars, liturgical years do have a chronos part to them. You know, there are days, there are seasons, there are hours, what time is Mass, all those kinds of things. But the hope is that we move away from this to the Kairos time, God's time, what's really profound that's happening during that time. Okay? Understand the difference?
Yes.
Next. Now the calendar, you've all got a representation of the calendar at your tables there. The calendar or liturgical year, this is actually not Greek, although it may look like it. It is a post-factum organization of feasts and seasons that had already developed. That was the definition one of my grad school professors gave. So let me pick it apart. What does it mean? What it basically means is, at the Last Supper, contrary to popular belief, Jesus, after offering up the bread and wine, did not pick up this and say, and by the way, this is the liturgical calendar that I want you all to observe. Okay? Meaning this was not handed down from the Last Supper. It happened post-factum. Feasts and seasons developed, and every so often the church would step back, invite in some of the type A personalities and say, could you organize this for us? It's messy. And so over time we came up with calendars. This is the current one, but we've had others over our 2,000-year history, okay? So it's an organization of things that had already started to bubble up of these different feasts and seasons. So it wasn't like someone had a grand master plan and put it into effect. These different things organically grew up over 2,000 years. So some of the stuff on this calendar is really ancient, 2,000 years old almost. Some of it may be only about 100 years old, okay? So it's an organization after the fact, after these things had already developed. We're almost at the end of these principles, now this is the boring part. The liturgical year calendar is a prophetic reminder of our growth into Christ. Why do we observe a calendar? To become more Christian, to become more Christ-like, to live the life of a disciple. It's only insofar as it is an aid to helping us live more Christ-like that the liturgical year is important. It's not wholly, H-O-L-Y, unto itself. It's wholly insofar as it helps us grow more Christ-like. All right? That's what that's all about. And lastly, different feasts and seasons celebrate different aspects of the same thing, the Paschal Mystery. Anyone heard that term Paschal Mystery before? Some of you thought that word Ephapak sounded a little bit like Paschal, right? Okay? Paschal meaning basically Easter, the Paschal Mystery. What is it? It's the heart of our faith. In a nutshell, everyone has a different way of probably defining it. I would say it's the death and resurrection. Say again. Yeah, go ahead. You're good.
Resurrection of Christ.
The death and resurrection of Christ and our participation in it. Because Christ died and rose, and we are called to die to our old selves constantly and rise to our new selves, right? The selves that Christ wants us to be, that God wants us to be. So every feast and season essentially is about the same thing, the Paschal Mystery. But we simply look at a different aspect of it. So it used to be popular 40 years ago to say, what's the theme of this liturgy? Well, the theme of every liturgy is the same. It's the Paschal Mystery. We're just looking at a different aspect of it. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, let's take a look at an image here. I told you before, I did 2 years of pre-med, and then I decided, I met organic chemistry, and we didn't get along. So I wasn't like the scientific one in the family. My wife's a nurse midwife, my brother's a physician, my dad was a physician. I was not the scientific guy. So whenever I show scientific images, I have to tread on water here, carefully. So this, I believe, is what's called a prism, and I believe what's happening here is a process known as refraction. Am I right so far?
Yeah.
Right, good. Now on the left, the light beam goes through the prism, and on the right, all the different colors of the light beam come out. But if the people in science, I think, would say that what's on the left and what's on the right are the same, right? They're just being pulled apart by the prism. Think about the liturgical year as the prism. Think about the light beam as the Paschal Mystery. And think about on the right side, all those rainbow colors there, that's all the different feasts and seasons. The liturgical year simply takes the Paschal mystery and opens it up for us so that we can look at a different aspect of it at different times of the year. Because it's such a rich mystery. Mystery, by the way, when we say that as Catholics, we don't mean something you can't understand, like a whodunit. We mean something that is so deep and so rich, we're constantly discovering new things about it, right? So that the liturgical year helps us to look at the Paschal mystery and focus on a different part of it at different times of the year. All right, so that's basically what the liturgical year is doing. It's acting like a prism. All right, now this I'm not going to walk through. It's much too small. It's simply these next two slides to show you that the liturgical year developed over time. So now I know it's too small for most of you, so I'm going to ask you a question, which is the answer to which is already up on the board there. But what was the original Christian feast? The first Christian feast historically? Sunday. Now you can see what's up there, because most of the time people would say Easter. Easter was later in development. The first thing that Christians started to observe was Sunday. We see that in the Acts of the Apostles. Those readings we hear in the Sundays after Easter Sunday, we hear about them gathering on a Sunday. It was the day after the Sabbath. It was not Sabbath day, which would have been Friday night into Saturday. It was the next day, Sunday. All right, so that was the first. So it was a weekly celebration. Easter came along as an annual celebration, a once-a-year celebration, 1 or 2 centuries later. So sometimes we say, well, Sundays are like little Easters, but actually, historically, it's the reverse. Easter is a whopping big Sunday. That's actually what's happening. So basically, what we do on Easter is what we do every Sunday of the year on steroids. Okay, that's kind of what we're doing. It's everything we do on Sunday. It's the Easter Bunny, right. Hey, I've been the Easter Bunny at church once. I don't even want to talk about that. That was a long time ago, and I think I had much too much wine on Easter Vigil the night before. So the pastor got me to dress up as Easter Bunny the next day. It's a long story. Anyhow, so Sunday comes first, then the annual Feast of Easter, then other things. Some people are surprised to know that about halfway down that list, Christmas wasn't observed until about the 4th century. Christians went 300 plus years not observing Christmas. They knew he was born, but they weren't concerned with the date. The big thing was when he had died. That they were concerned about. Because they believed when he had died, he would return on the anniversary of his death. That was the belief in the ancient church. That's actually the origin of our Easter Vigil celebration. Vigiling, waiting for the return of Christ on the anniversary of his resurrection. But they weren't so interested in his birth, and when they started observing it, no one had any idea when he was born. December 25th, there's lots of reasons for that, but no one has any idea he was born on December 25th. That's not an historical accurate date, as far as we know. All right? But so over time, different things develop. We start moving into the 5th and 7th centuries, for example. A lot of the feasts about Mary start developing because we have councils of the church that are talking about the role of Mary. So we have feasts of Mary that come in then. And as time goes on, other things happen. When we move into the 16th century, we're jumping through centuries here really fast. This is the time of the Protestant Reformation. The Catholic response to the Reformation was basically to kind of dig in our heels and say, no, this is really important, we're not going to change. So we kind of dug in our heels for about 400 years. That had positive as well as negative aspects to it. Basically, things became the same for 400 years. So after 1,600 years of rather constant development change, for about 400 years we kind of put on the brakes. And we entered a period of what was called, and these aren't meant to be negative terms, but they were a period of uniformity. Everything was kind of the same for about 400 years. And rubricism. Rubricism, anyone know where that word comes from? It comes from the word rubric. Anyone know what a rubric is? You heard that term? What's a rubric?
A grading, like breakdown.
Breakdown. Anyone else? Yeah, that's part of it. What else? It's a rule, yeah? So if you open up the book that Father uses at the altar, the Missal, most of the text is in black. That's the stuff he says. The stuff in red is the stuff he does, or it's the instructions for how to say what he's saying. Those are the rubrics. They come from the Latin word for red. That's why they're printed in red. Rubrica is red in Latin. And rubrics comes from the Latin word for red. It's the stuff that's typed in red in the book. That's where it comes from. So now you'll know that question when you play Catholic Trivial Pursuit next time. That is right. That's where rubrics come from. So it was a time of paying a lot of attention to rubrics and a certain uniformity for about 400 years. As we know, because many of us lived through at least part of this, the 20th century brought a lot of reforms. They didn't begin at Vatican II. As you can see, they go all the way back to 1913, with Pius IX starting some reforms. Pius XII did a lot of reforms, especially around Holy Week in the 50s, before we got to the 1963 and following, where they were the Vatican II reforms. And so there were reforms with our calendar. The calendar was once again revised following Vatican II. It had been revised several times over our history. It was revised again. And then most recently, we've had our books revised. You remember back in the early 2000s, we had our lectionary, the Book of Readings, revised. And then back in 2011, the Book of Prayers, the Missal, was revised. Remember, we all had to learn how to say, and with your spirit, as opposed to, and also with you. So that had had some bearing on how we celebrate the liturgical year. So there's 2,100 years in about 5 minutes. Here we're not, yes.
I have to stand up.
That's okay, stand up, stretch, do whatever you need. Well, I'm not going to talk about these in any detail, but to say that there are actually official documents in our church that guide the liturgical year. So I know some of you serve on liturgy committee or liturgical ministries. Yes? Anyone want to admit that? No one wants to admit that. No one? Any liturgy committee folks here tonight?
No, not yet.
No? Okay. All right. You're getting a liturgy committee together?
We don't know that yet.
Okay. Just remember, when Father calls and asks you to be in the liturgy committee, I love Elaine Rendler's definition of a liturgy committee. It's a wonderful one. It will definitely motivate you. A liturgy committee is that opportunity for those who have never suffered for their church to do so. Just remember, when Father calls and asks you, time off in purgatory. But there are documents that liturgy committees become familiar with. They're dry as dust, but they're important. And they kind of tell us about the rules and regulations around the liturgical year, and that's what those are. All right? All right, now, the last part. Days and seasons in the liturgical year. So, we have days, we have weeks, we have year, we have seasons. So, the liturgical day, and this first one was like a duh statement. The liturgical day runs from midnight to midnight. Duh, there's a real insight there. But they have to say that because the observance of certain days, Sundays and solemnities, begins with the evening of the preceding day. So that's why we have Saturday afternoon masses that count for Sunday. Where do you think that comes from? Who else has a day that begins the previous evening? Jews. That's exactly where it comes from. Our Jewish ancestors began their major festivals on sundown, and so we have inherited the Jewish system for Sundays and for major feasts like holy days. They begin officially sundown the previous day, which is why we can have a 4 o'clock Mass on Saturday. That counts for Sunday. But other days are midnight to midnight, which is Roman time. So our calendar is a combination of Roman time, most of the time, 6 days of the week, and Jewish time, 1 day of the week, plus where there's a holy day. Okay? So that's the first thing to know, is we have 2 different ways of reckoning days. Then Sunday, we saw historically, that's the first holy day of all. That was the first holy day we ever observed. Solemnities are these days in the calendar that are apart from Sundays most of the time, that have special status as well. They have the same status as a Sunday, but they usually don't fall on a Sunday. Most of them are referred to as holy days of obligation. But the kind of official term is solemnities. And then there's a few other categories. We're not going to get into them. Feasts, memorials, a couple different kinds of memorials, and then plain old ordinary weekdays. So those are the different categories of weekdays in order of precedence. Most important ones down to the least important ones. Okay? So those are the different days we have in the church calendar. Then we have this yearly cycle, and there, if you want to look at what's on your tables there, this wonderful visual image of the liturgical year, you'll see this. So the Easter Triduum is actually the high point of the liturgical year. Can anyone find that? What color is it on your calendar? Red. Ah, this is a good parish here. You must have had some good pastors here. What'd you have, like a Mike Broderick and a Dennis O'Brien and Jim Mangeluzzo or something? Oh my God.
And Tim Brewer.
And Tim Brewer. All right. All-star team. So yes, the Triduum is the most important and also the shortest season of the year. Right? Okay, so Triduum. Where does that word mean? Triduum. 3 days. And what are those 3 days? Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter Sunday, Holy Saturday, and Easter Sunday. 3 days. Whoa. What happened? The evening. Day 1 is Holy Thursday evening through Good Friday evening, day 1. Day 2 is Good Friday evening to Holy Saturday evening. And day 3 is Holy Saturday evening to the end of Easter Sunday. That's why it's 3 days. It's the Jewish time reckoning, except for the end of Easter Sunday, which goes all the way through to midnight. That's why it's 3 days. But people will say, well, isn't that really 4 days? No, it's 3. All right? The Easter season is the next sort of most important one. You'll see that. That's the big gold block right after the Triduum. And Easter season is how many days?
40.
50 days. 50 days. That's all right. You're coming up soon on that 40. Hold that one because that's going to be coming up soon. So 50 days from Easter Sunday through Pentecost Sunday. All right? So Easter for us is not just a day or even 3 days. It's an entire season. So that means you can hold off buying the Easter candy till the day after Easter. It's half price, and you still got 49 more days to eat it, right? Good way to do it. Lent. So Lent is the purple block before the Triduum. So that's how many days? 40. Yay, that's 40 in there. Now actually, if you count it, believe it or not, it's not 40 days. Lent, if you count it, is actually, anyone know? 41. Do I hear a 42? 42. Do I hear a 43? Do I hear a 40? 43 and 2/3 days. If you actually count it. So when does Lent begin? Ash Wednesday. And it goes midnight to midnight on Ash Wednesday. When does Lent end? Look at your little calendars there. When does Lent end? Sunset on Holy Thursday. So it's basically 2/3 of Thursday. Okay? And so if you count from Ash Wednesday, full days, including Sundays, come to 43, and then 2/3 of Holy Thursday. Sundays are officially counted in Lent. They are part of Lent, okay? But, so it hasn't been 40 for a while now, but we still hold on to the typology of 40. So, at some point, we didn't have 40 anymore. It became 43 and 2/3. And so they wrote a song for that. It was, Lord, who threw out those 40 days? I know. Then the next season, hey, come on, you gotta have some really bad ones in here too. Then the next major season is the Christmas season. You'll find that as the other gold block. It's about 2.5 weeks or 2 weeks long, and that goes from when till when? Christmas season or Christmas time begins when?
Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve. So about 4 o'clock on Christmas Eve is when it begins. And when does Christmas for us Catholics end?
Epiphany.
6. The baptism.
Can I hear more? Baptism of the Lord, right. So at one point in time it did end with Epiphany, but in the current calendar it goes to the baptism of the Lord. So it's usually 2 to 2.5 weeks depending on when Christmas falls. Okay? So there again, you can say buy your Christmas presents on the 26th. It's still Christmas season. Get all those sales. And then the season before Christmas, of course, is Advent. So we see the lighter purple for 3.5 to 4 weeks. This year it was only, 3 weeks and half of a day. So in any case, the better part of 4 weeks is Advent. And the rest of the year is what we call ordinary time. Now, why do you think it's called ordinary? Because it's not extraordinary, right? That is one way of looking at it. But the other, it's numbered, exactly. Exactly. Ordinal numbers, which comes from the Latin word ordines, which is basically for counting. So it's just weeks that we count off.
Yeah.
And the biggest chunk of that is from the end of Pentecost to the beginning of Advent, so it's that lower half of the calendar, and then that little piece we just finished between Christmas season and Lent. So we have 2 blocks of ordinary time. And then we have something called Rogation and Ember Days, and you celebrate those well here, so I'm not going to bother with those. We're going to move right along.
What are they?
What are they? We're actually getting those in a minute. So I'll tell you what they are. So first of all, the holy days of obligation. These are the big solemnities. There's actually 10 of them. We don't observe all of them in the United States. So different countries observe different holy days of obligation. So the ones that, I'll give you the next one that tells you which is which. So the things that are in green with 1 asterisk before them are transferred to the nearest Sunday. So Epiphany, Ascension are transferred to the nearest Sunday, except in certain parts of the country, like our part of the country, where Ascension is still Thursday. But the vast majority of the United States and most other countries, Ascension is transferred to the 7th Sunday of Easter. So those 2 get transferred in most places. The things with 2 asterisks, and I can't tell what color that is, which would be St. Joseph Day and Saints Peter and Paul. Those are holy days that are observed without obligation in the United States. Now, as an Italian, I take a little bit of, personal affront to this, that on March 19th, we're not celebrating the feast of St. Joseph. After that, totally unimportant feast 2 days later. 2 days before, I'm sorry, before. We give all this attention. Notice St. Patrick is nowhere on that list. He gets like a major feast day. Anyhow, in certain countries,
Arimathea Day on the 17th.
There we go. It's Arimathea. But in certain places, not for example, Italy, March 19th, everything shuts down. Major holiday. It is a holiday of obligation in Italy and other countries. And then lastly, the light color, whatever that is, with 3 asterisks, are observed without obligation when they fall on a Saturday or a Monday. So, for example, January 1st, August 15th, November 1st. We observe them, and if they fall on a Saturday or Monday, you don't have to go to Mass that day. All right? The rest of them, in white, are always observed on their day in the United States. Now, in other countries, that's going to be a different lineup. Okay, but that's how we observe them in the United States. All right, so those are our big days. What are some of the other seasons? So we've already talked a little bit about the seasons, and we're going to get to Ember Days, don't worry. So the Paschal Triduum, basically I'm going to tell you 2 facts about each of the seasons. What is it all about, and how long does it last? So the first fact about the Triduum, what is it all about? The Triduum shines forth as the high point of the entire liturgical year. So it's the culmination of the whole year for us. And it has preeminence in the week, the same preeminence that Sunday has, the preeminence that Sunday has in the week, the solemnity of Easter and Triduum has in the liturgical year. So it's the high point of the year for us. It starts with the evening Mass of the Lord's Supper, has its center or culmination in the Vigil, and closes with evening prayer on the Sunday of the Lord's Resurrection. So in monasteries and people who pray the liturgy of the hours, evening prayer is the last prayer time on Sunday night. So it goes all that time. So that's the Triduum. The Easter season is the 50 days. They're celebrated in joy and exultation as one big feast day. They are considered actually one great Sunday. They are the days above all others in which we sing the Alleluia. So we fast from the Alleluia all throughout Lent, and we kind of indulge in the Alleluia for the 50 days of Easter. All right? Lent is ordered for 2 things. I'm still having, this is the new translation. When they revised the Missal, they revised this document too, and the language is a little bit odd. Lent is ordered to preparing for the celebration of Easter. Since the Lenten liturgy prepares for the celebration of the Paschal Mystery, both catechumens, by the various stages of Christian initiation, and the faithful who recall their own baptism and do penance. That's a long sentence. In the old translation, that was 3 different sentences. It's a rather long run-on sentence here. So basically, Lent is about 2 things. Getting catechumens ready to be baptized at Easter. Do you have any catechumens here? People getting baptized this year? So you know that Lent is the period of intense preparation leading up to that. And it's also a time for the faithful. Who's the faithful? All of us. It's another word for the baptized. Okay, it's another term for the baptized. We get ready by recalling our baptism and doing penance so we can be ready to renew our baptism at Easter. All right? And the 4th day, that's a typo. The 40 days of Lent go from Ash Wednesday up to but excluding the Mass of the Lord's Supper. So those are those 3 seasons. And then you'll see similar things said about Christmas, Advent, and Ordinary Time. Just going to highlight a couple things here. Christmas is about the first paragraph there, the memorial of the Nativity of the Lord and his first manifestation. So it's not only the Nativity, the birth, but it's his Epiphany, it's his baptism, those early manifestations of Jesus as the Son of God. In Advent, like Lent, also has a 2-fold character. And again, this is awkward phrasing where this new translation goes, but I'll see if I can figure this out. It is a time of preparation for the solemnities of Christmas, in which the first coming of the Son of God to humanity is remembered. And likewise, this is number 2, it's a time when by remembering Christ's first coming, the minds and hearts are led to look forward to Christ's second coming at the end of time. So we're looking ahead to Christmas, and we're also looking ahead to the second coming at the end of time. So 2 points. The second coming at the end of time usually is the first couple of weeks of Advent. Looking ahead to Christmas is usually the last 2 weeks of Advent. And an ordinary time basically unpacks all the other mysteries of Christ, all the other aspects of Christ's life in the Paschal mystery. All right, I think this next one's to get to your question. What are Rogation and Ember Days? On Rogation and Ember Days, the church is accustomed, sorry, this is rather old-fashioned language, is accustomed to entreat the Lord for the various needs of humanity, especially for the fruits of the earth and for human labor, and to give him thanks publicly. These are basically agricultural festivals. In places that were heavily agriculturally oriented, you would take time to thank God for the harvest, for example, and to pray. Those were Rogation Days, were traditionally celebrated on the 3 days before Ascension. They may now be celebrated at any time when it's appropriate to ask that gardens, fields, and orchards be blessed. On Ember Days, the members of the family may wish to offer their prayer, fasting, and almsgiving for their own sins and the sins of the world. On these days, we turn our attention to our dependence on God, who alone fulfills our hungers and brings healing to a wounded world. And this is from the U.S. Catholic Bishop's prayer book called Catholic Household Blessings and Prayers. And they suggest 4 seasonal Ember Days of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving around 4 different themes. One that has to do with the January 22nd Roe v. Wade anniversary, sins against life. One that has to do with sins of hatred and prejudice around Yom HaShoah, the remembrance of the Holocaust. Summer, it has to do with the sins of violence around the anniversaries of the atomic bombings of the 2 cities in Japan. And in autumn, reparation for sins against the poor as we get ready to celebrate the indulgence of Thanksgiving to remember those who go without. So those are recommended by the U.S. bishops for our country. So those are what Rogation and Ember Days are. All right, and then we come to what you see in front of you. This is just an older version. This comes out every year. This particular publisher gets a different artist every year to do the background, and then basically gives you every day and season in the year.
Also, the back has stuff on it too.
And the back has lots of good information.
Probably you too if you read this.
That's right. You've read this. You can avoid mine. Thanks. Nothing like making someone feel welcome. No, but you're absolutely right. There's great information on the back here. There is really good. So, it is about 3 minutes before 8. I've been talking a lot. Let me stop and say, what are some questions or what are some things that occur to you or come to mind as we're talking about this, other than, boy, I really should stop and I can go to sleep. Questions, concerns, comments, something you learned tonight you didn't know before, something that challenged you? It was Greek to you. Good. What else?
Question, when did Passion Sunday get brought and become the 5th Sunday of Lent, or what we used to call Passion Sunday?
So Passion Sunday now is, what they did is they combined it. Palm Sunday is now referred to as Palm Sunday of the Passion of the Lord. So they combined them. It would have been in the revision of 1960, the Vatican II revision. So it would have been the early 60s, yeah. And calling it Passion Sunday was probably only about a 400-year-old tradition. In other words, that was not an ancient tradition. Now 400 years is a long time. I'm not trying to put down things that we did from the 1570s to the 1970s, the Tridentine period. There was a lot of wonderful stuff that went on. But a lot of those things were put into effect in 1570 with the Council of Trent, but they didn't go back before that. I don't know the exact history of the old Passion Sunday, but I suspect it's not any earlier than about 1570 Trent, and it was dropped with the 1970 revision. But it was combined with Palm Sunday, so it's now Palm Sunday of the Passion of the Lord.
This might sound like a silly question, but it's really not.
That's right.
You talked about Vatican II.
Yep.
What happened to all those people that meet on Fridays? No, all of a sudden you didn't have to, and it was a mortal sin. Why didn't the church go and say what it was meant for? It was meant for economy and for health and for just for a moment to stop and do a sacrifice for Christ every Friday. Why did they just say that instead of attaching a mortal sin to it? Well, what happened?
Yeah, so I don't know why they did that. I think what I would say is, I think you have a really positive thing in what you're saying, which is that sometimes we get hung up with the letter of the law and forget what the spirit of it is. Now, I'm not saying that we should ignore the letter of the law. I'm not saying that, but there's a spirit underneath that sometimes get lost. I'll use an example from my own life. When I was growing up, the Fridays of Lent, you couldn't have meat, but you could go have a lobster roll. Now, did that make any sense? Of course it didn't. Because a hot dog was a whole lot less expensive and simple than a lobster roll was. So that was paying attention to the letter of the law, not the spirit. The spirit of fasting and abstaining is that we, who basically have food on our plate every day, get to experience temporarily what is for other people a daily reality. And then when we're made aware of that, we do something to help those people. So for me, fasting has to be tied into almsgiving. It's prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. I work in colleges, so I've been working in college ministry for about 25 years. And what I often say to the students is, you're not giving up beer and putting it in the piggy bank so you can go to, Cancun during spring break. That's not the whole point. You're putting it in the piggy bank so you give it to Catholic Relief Services or something like that. So that's why we fast, to sort of experience temporarily what other people have as a daily reality, and then to try to help offer some of what we have to those people.
See, I had read it where it was as a sacrifice to share in Christ's sacrifice.
Yes, so I think you can look at it at a number of different levels. That's also true. You can say that by doing that, we're participating in Christ's sacrifice. But I think that the point is that when we participate in Christ's sacrifice, we do it in such a way that it helps other people, and it affects other people as well. So, in other words, I fast and give alms not just for my own spiritual benefit. It is for that. That's the participating in Christ's sacrifice. But I also do it so that it helps someone else.
Because Christ's sacrifice helped us.
Help other people, exactly. So with that having been said, just to know that the rules and duration of fasting over the church's history have changed dramatically. The origin of Lent, before it was even a 40-day, never mind 43 2/3, was a 2-day period. 2 days was the original Lent, and it was complete fasting for 2 days, leading up to Easter. So it would have been the equivalent of Good Friday and Holy Saturday. People ate and drank nothing, complete fast to get ready for the vigil. At the vigil, they broke the fast. That's where our term breakfast comes from, right? Break the fast, break fast. That's where it comes from, okay? So Lent was originally a heavy-duty 2 days of fasting. And when it became, grew to like 8 days, and then eventually 40, they said, well, you can't have people, fasting permanently for 8 days. 40 days, there'd be no one left. So they cut back, and they went to the Fridays and that sort of thing. And then at one point, it became all the Fridays of the year. And there are still people, including the American bishops, who have encouraged Catholics to fast on Fridays throughout the year, or at least abstain from meat, so as to be in solidarity with people who go without food on a regular basis. Again, it's the spirit of what you do. So, we Catholics can take on those things voluntarily, even if the church doesn't tell us to do them. We can take them on voluntarily. It's a good question. Anything else? Yes?
Yes, I have a question about Epiphany, after Christmas. I always thought it was, I think it's the second Sunday in January.
That's right.
Correct?
That's right. Yep. Usually
That's
the first
when our
or second.
Christmas season ends. I tell everybody, Christmas isn't over yet.
That's
We have
right.
another 12 days.
That's right. So if you do the 12 days, it goes to Epiphany, more or less, and then but the recent revision has extended it a few more days to the baptism of the Lord, because that's considered another time where Jesus was made manifest as the Son of God. So at the baptism of Jesus, God comes out of the sky and says, "Boom, this is my Son." And so that's another manifestation of Jesus. Epiphany, he's manifested to the Gentiles. Baptism, he's manifested as the Son of God. So those are all part of the season. But you're right, that's a whole season for us. That's right. Yes?
I really appreciated your graphic of the prism. I think that just really sums up the whole thing.
Good. Thank you.
Just really memorable and
Thank you.
succinct.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel if you can remember one thing from a presentation like this, that's great. Absolutely. Thank you. Anything else? Comments? Yes?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that the clarification of the eves of everything
Yeah.
was really, that was
Good.
very interesting.
Yeah. Yes, that's where it comes from.
Very good.
Well, can you address, in terms of liturgical styles, I should say styles, we have how we celebrate Mass here, then there's allowances for the Tridentine style Mass or a Latin Mass. Could you explain how all that sort of coexists within the life of the church and is all still is okay?
Sure. Yeah, so this really gets beyond the liturgical year to just sort of celebrating liturgy in general, but the reality is that our church has had a variety of ways of celebrating Mass for a long time. I'll use an example that I just heard today. Spring break was last week for us at Assumption, and we sent out about 50 to 60 students on spring break service trips. One of them went down to New Orleans, Louisiana, and they went to a church. They didn't know what the local churches were, but they went to this church that ended up being a historically black church, African-American Catholic church in Louisiana. It was a very large African-American Catholic population in Louisiana. And so the students went to this African-American Mass, Catholic Mass, and it was about 2 hours long, which to them was amazing, but it was Chronos time because none of them complained. They said it was the most amazing homily they've ever heard. It was probably 35 to 40 minutes long. Spirited singing. So, you know, if you've never been to a black Catholic church, picture in your mind your images of a black Baptist church and then superimpose it on the Mass. And it actually works. Now that is a totally legitimate expression of the Mass. Did they do everything we do on Sunday? Absolutely. Did it look different? Absolutely. Now you go to, say you go downtown Worcester to St. Paul's Cathedral, the downstairs church where the Spanish community celebrates, or you maybe have a Spanish community in this area. It's going to be the same Mass, but not only will the language be different, but there might be a different feel to it. You go to a different part of this country and you're going to experience Mass and it will feel different.
Where do they do Latin masses around here?
So they do Latin Masses also.
They
So
do where?
Oh, I'm not even sure. We're Harvard. Thank you. It's Harvard. Harvard's still a river. So what I'm getting at is that there's the kind of what we call the ordinary form of the Mass, which is not the Latin one. So the vernacular, in our case, English form of the Mass. There's the Latin form of the Mass from 1962, which is more or less what we do, but in Latin. And then there's the old Latin Mass, which is Tridentine. So there's two different Latin Masses. There's the kind of the new Mass in Latin, and there's the old Tridentine Mass. All of those are acceptable forms right now, okay? But even with those three forms, they're going to look very different and done in different places. Now the Latin ones maybe won't look too different because the language is going to be the same everywhere. But you go to a black Catholic church, an Hispanic Catholic church, an Anglo-Catholic church, a Catholic church in this part of the country versus that part of the country, they're all going to look very different. And let's face it, even within white Anglo-Saxon Catholic communities in the Diocese of Worcester, you go from one parish to the next, and it's going to look different. Now, we're all working out of the same books. We all have the same guidelines. I don't believe that so-and-so is disobeying the law and so-and-so is obeying it to the nth degree. I believe we're all following the same rules. We're just expressing it differently, right? Because we are different people. So long as we, there's a basic skeleton that we must follow, otherwise it's not Catholic. But beyond that, how we express it can be very different. So you remember the old days? There was the organ mass, the folk mass, the quiet mass, all those kinds of things. Those are all different expressions of the same mass, but they were quite different, weren't they?
We have an organ now.
You have an organ now. So I bet you have an organ mass now. Yeah.
When you talk about two different Latin masses, can you clarify?
Yeah. So the Tridentine Mass was the Mass from 1570. So it's called Tridentine because it originated out of the Council of Trent. That's where the word Tridentine comes from. So 1570 is the date that's usually given for that missal, the Tridentine Missal. It's the Mass we used for 400 years in the Catholic Church, from 1570 to 1970. And that form, if you remember, it was quite different.
Right.
So that is the Tridentine form. In 1962, before the new Mass was actually introduced, they introduced a version of the new Mass in Latin. It wasn't the Tridentine Mass. It was a version of the new Mass they called the Novus Ordo in English. It was 1962. And so that can still be done. So there's two different versions of the Latin Mass. The old Tridentine from 1570 and the newer one from 1962. And then there's the Mass in vernacular, whatever language you happen to use, which is from 1970. So we have three different ones.
Byzantine Rite.
And then the Byzantine Rite's a whole other family that
Very
belongs to us as well. They're our cousins. Yeah. I know we're running out of time, so I see some more hands up, but I think we probably will call it. But I will stick around for some questions if people want to come up and talk individually, but I know some people need to move. So I'll try to respect that since we're talking about time.